Ads for Subway steak sandwiches look mouthwateringly good, but is it really steak? And more importantly, should you order it? We've done the research, so you don't have to. You may remember the massive controversy Subway found itself in when it had to dispute claims that the tuna was not actually 100% tuna. But here's the thing. The tuna filling for the sandwiches can't technically be 100% tuna, because it also contains things like mayo and seasoning. Makes sense, right? Similarly, there's a lot more to Subway's steak than just beef, and although that's the first and main ingredient, there are a surprising number of other ingredients too. Beef and water head the official list of Subway steak ingredients. The mix also includes things like citric acid, natural beef-type flavor, maltodextrin, dried tomato, modified cornstarch, soybean oil, and a slew of artificial-sounding ingredients like silicon dioxide and disodium inosonate.
Where's the beef?
It's worth noting that Subway steak contains slightly different ingredients in other countries. In Canada, for example, you'll see lemon juice solids, onion powder, and garlic powder on the list as well. Canada also has a jerk-spiced steak, which sounds downright delightful, and includes molasses, jerk seasoning, spices, and smoke flavor. In 2022, Subway announced a massive menu overhaul, including a number of new sandwiches, and in 2023, the chain announced that it was installing meat slicers in many stores. There was a footnote to that news, however. Steak was still going to be sent to stores pre-sliced. That doesn't mean that the steak hasn't undergone some changes. Look back at the ingredients list from 2019 and you'll find some things that aren't on the 2024 version, including lemon powder, garlic powder, onion powder, and turmeric. On the flip side, ingredients like caramelized sugar and non-food additives like disodium guanylate and sodium hydroxide have been added, which is a little weird. At a time when consumers are more aware than ever of the quality of beef contained in their fast food burgers, Subway has pumped even more additives and hard-to-pronounce ingredients into its steak. And there's more. When a video showing steak prep at Subway was uploaded to TikTok in 2024, it made headlines. The video showed an employee opening a plastic bag of pre-shredded meat, mixing it up to break it apart, then weighing out portions. Shocking? Maybe, but it was nothing new. Subway training videos showing the same process have been available on YouTube for years, so slicers or not, it seems as though the chain has no intention of changing the way it's preparing its steak. Let's take a closer look at some of the more problematic ingredients in Subway steak and see if we can figure out why they're there. Some, like sodium phosphate, maltodextrin, citric acid, and sodium hydroxide are preservatives, and cultured sugar is used to prevent mold growth. As for hydrolyzed corn protein, that's a flavor enhancer. Even though it's made from corn, it's known for adding umami to foods, particularly meats and gravies. That's a lot of added preservatives, and if you're wondering why Subway steak contains different types of additives that seem to do the same thing, we can explain. Different preservatives act in different ways. Some prevent mold growth, some are antibacterial, some slow the oxidation and spoilage processes, and some preserve color, texture, or flavor.
That sounds too complicated.
Silicon dioxide is generally used as an anti-clumping agent, and similarly, modified cornstarch is used to preserve texture during cooking. But what about caramelized sugar? That's used as both a flavor enhancer and coloring agent. When you hear that something contains yeast, you probably don't think it's a meat product, but there's something called autolyzed yeast in Subway steak. Yes, it starts out as the same sort of yeast used in breads and brewing. That yeast is then subjected to a process that separates the parts of the cell after enzymes in the yeast further break down the proteins, and one of the things that's left over is glutamic acid. So what's it doing in steak? Some studies suggest that in addition to boosting flavor, autolyzed yeast improves the texture of processed meats. But it's high in sodium, so anyone watching their sodium intake might want to keep an eye out for this one. It's weird to see natural beef-type flavor being added to a product that's literally mostly beef, so what gives? Subway actually lists some of the individual ingredients of its beef flavoring, including autolyzed yeast, but also lists natural flavor, which somehow sounds extremely unnatural. Federal legislation says that as long as flavoring agents are FDA approved and they're not allergens, they don't have to be labeled, so who knows what falls under that bucket. The science of added flavors is actually pretty cool. It's essentially the chemistry of combining amino acids and other components that mimic the taste of beef. But why would Subway need to add beef flavoring to literal beef? We couldn't find a definitive answer, but we can guess. Not all beef tastes the same. Even meat from individual cattle from the same herd might have a different flavor. But beef flavoring formulated in a lab is controllable, and for a chain restaurant, consistency is a big deal. Subway's nutritional information is pretty helpful. It lists not only the totals for specific subs, but for individual ingredients as well. So what are you getting with one serving of steak? That single portion adds up to 110 calories, 5 grams of fat, and 450 milligrams of sodium. Those numbers might not mean too much, but let's put them in context. According to the American Heart Association, most Americans have way too much sodium in their diets and should be aiming for no more than 2,300 milligrams per day, with a best-case scenario of 1,500 milligrams per day. When you look at the total for Subway's 6-inch Philly sub, for instance, that's about 1,300 milligrams of sodium. Those numbers don't apply to every Subway either. In fact, the numbers for other countries are pretty different. Take Ireland. There, a serving of steak has 86 calories, 1.4 grams of fat, and 700 milligrams of sodium. Fascinating. Way back in 2015, Subway promised to eliminate antibiotics from all the meats served in its restaurants. The plan was to start with chicken and work gradually through the menu, ending with antibiotic-free beef sometime in 2025. The plan was wildly ambitious, especially because Subway was one of the nation's largest fast food chains at the time.
In June, Subway pledged to do away with artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives in North American stores by the end of 2017.
In the announcement, Subway said it hoped the move would encourage other chains to do the same. In 2016, the new strategy gave Subway a massive boost on the chain reaction report when it came to the transparency of meat sourcing and antibiotic use. Subway, along with Chick-fil-A, was given a B grade, while many other chains sat at an F. Fast forward to 2019, though, and Subway had dropped a full letter grade. It likely would have dropped even lower, except for the promise to have antibiotic-free beef on the menu in the future. Things were looking even more disappointing in 2021 when another chain reaction report again gave Subway a C for the policies that were on point. But they included a massive footnote. It turns out that the chain had still not actually gotten around to putting any of its new policies into practice. Details of just where Subway is in the process of getting rid of antibiotics in its meats are unclear. As of November 2024, Subway's official website states that the target end date of 2025 still stands. Sure, you can stop into Subway and order steak on a sub, but did you know that you can also order just a side of steak? You absolutely can. According to employees on Reddit, you won't even be making their job complicated, as there's an easy way for a side of steak to be rung up on the register. That's great news if you'd like some extra steak on your sub, but according to other Redditors, there's an even better use for it.
Since the dawn of time, steak has been the unquestionable master of the menu.
Almost every restaurant has a secret menu. Some secret menus are good, and some are bad. Subway fans say that steak is at the heart of a stellar secret menu item that involves a bag or two of Doritos, plus steak and cheese put together to make some downright delicious nachos. Want to take it to the next level? You're already at Subway, so make the most of it. Olives, jalapenos, tomatoes, and even a dash of ranch dressing can make a seriously amazing dish. Doritos are also an excellent addition to a steak sub, and if you're familiar with the idea of a Frito pie, it turns out that Subway steak is pretty delicious in a Dorito-based version of that too. Simply crush your bag of chips, add your steak and other toppings to the bag, and you've got a lunch that's definitely not boring. There's some bad news here for anyone who swears by Subway steak, and that's the fact that steak has earned spots on a few not-so-stellar mashed roundups. That includes a piece on things that you should never order at Subway, where a registered dietitian calls out the steak, egg, and cheese breakfast sandwich for being small, unsatisfying, and yet still containing 18 grams of fat. The Philly and the Monster cheesesteak subs also made it onto the list of Subway's unhealthiest Subway sandwiches, alongside subs with names like The Beast. Surprisingly, although Subway's steak contains about a third of the American Heart Association's recommended daily sodium intake, it's not the worst choice on the menu as far as proteins go. The steak clocks in at 450 milligrams of sodium for a 6-inch sub, while the buffalo chicken has double that amount. The meatballs and cold cuts are also up there, averaging between 650 and 690 milligrams apiece. The steak is also lower in fat than other meats, containing just 5 grams compared to meatballs, which have about 18 grams, and the egg patty at 15 grams. While there might not be as many pre-made sandwich options when it comes to steak, it's still a relatively respectable option. As a bonus, it's also often featured in limited edition menu items like the cheesy garlic steak. For those who love to mix it up at lunch, that's a definite bonus. We've all been out at a restaurant, gotten our food, and wondered where the rest of it is. And when it comes to Subway steak, you're likely to be disappointed when you see what amounts to a portion. A breakfast-sized serving of steak is just 1 1/4 ounce, and for the subs, it's just 2.5 ounces. Subway uses a few different methods of measuring, including specially sized scoops and boats, which are basically small dishes in which portions are carefully weighed out. Still, the attempt at standardization hasn't stopped some major complaints. In October 2024, a class action lawsuit was filed against Subway claiming that these steak and cheese subs were depicted in advertising as allegedly having much more meat than customers who ordered them actually got.
She bought a steak and cheese sandwich that the suit says contained 200% less meat than the heroes depicted in Subway ads.
As of November 2024, the outcome of the suit remains to be seen. Bizarrely, a similar lawsuit was filed in Philadelphia less than 2 weeks later. This, too, was a class action suit that specifically named the steak and cheese sub as being sorely lacking in the meat department, especially when compared to the images used in advertising. Plaintiffs claimed that if the sub was advertised truthfully, they never would have considered buying it. They have an excellent point.
A separate lawsuit argued Subway's famous foot-long sandwiches were not actually a foot long.
The decisions in these lawsuits could impact fast food advertising going forward.